Hey, it looks like we are live now, so we can go ahead and get started here. Hi, everyone. I'm Chris Xu, the Director of Cinema Marketing at Christie, and I'll be your moderator for this second session of the CineSparks webinar series. CineSparks is created for emerging filmmakers, screenwriters, and cinematographers, basically anyone new to cinema and moving pictures, to get an update on industry trends and hopefully round out your knowledge while setting the stage for what the future of the industry may look like. So, welcome. Before jumping into our session, just a few bits of housekeeping for this webinar. The webinar is going to be recorded, so it can be watched again later. You can use the chat area to talk amongst yourself and post your questions for our guests in the Q&A panel. We'll answer as many of those questions towards the end of this session. If you love the CineSparks series, please share this with industry friends or colleagues by tagging us on social media at Christie Digital and hashtagging CineSparks with your comments. So before I introduce our guests, just a little bit about myself. I've been in the industry for nearly 10 years now, and I have a really strong passion for movies. It's both watching them and making sure as a technology company, we can help to drive a better audience experience forward. My love for cinema started really when I was pretty young, and I was engulfed in the whole movie magic of storytelling and the soundtracks that go along with them. I know when I say this, it's going to date me, but I did grow up in a generation of just collecting things, and I have a massive collection of movies from VHSs, VCDs, DVDs, Blu-rays, 4Ks, you name it. But at the end of the day, nothing beats that in-theater experience. Now, it's October 1st today. With Halloween around the corner, I've been watching a lot of horror lately. It's probably something that Southeast Asia really has a mastery in. I do enjoy big time action, edge of seat dramas, the tear jerkers that tug on your heartstrings, and really just feel good, real to life stories. If you've got a favorite film, whether it's local or global, let us know. I'd love to go back through the comments later and take a look at some of the recommendations. Anyway, I'm excited to host today's webinar. Christie has been in the cinema industry for over 65 years now, from film to digital, and now we're using the latest technology with RGB pure laser projection. We are pretty proud of that. As a player in the cinema industry, it's important for us to share knowledge and expertise, and it's a big reason why we created Christie Ignite, a program to nurture the next generation of cinema professionals. The CineSparks webinar series is a part of that. Now, we couldn't have pulled this webinar series off without the help of our collaborators, partners, and industry experts. So hopefully you'll be inspired by the stories and experiences they share with you. Singaporean filmmaker Yee-Wei Chai was one of the first collaborators to jump on this opportunity to present to you all. As a filmmaker and tech enthusiast, Yee-Wei's passion for storytelling led him to create Mocha Chai Laboratories, a boutique digital film lab that provides state-of-the-art post-production services to regional filmmakers and beyond. His commitment to developing meaningful content and exploring new technologies to tell better stories has played a key role in his journey to where he is today. So help me welcome to the stage Yee-Wei. It's great to have you here today.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Chris. Thank you, Christy, for also organizing this and inviting me on board. Really excited to talk to everyone.
Yeah, we're excited to hear about the success of Hyperlocal films, especially since your latest award-winning one, Wonderland, is a fantastic example of this new trend.
Thank you. It's a film that it's my first film in 10 years, but I took a hiatus to focus on building that post facility that you were talking about. So we were the first Dolby Vision, Dolby Atmos facility in Southeast Asia. And I'm a big fan of using technology to tell stories. And although my film is very much a film about something that happens in the 80s, it's shot with very modern, current state-of-the-art technology, cameras, post-production workflow.
I'm sure you utilized a lot of your own production workhouse to be able to accomplish that. So we will get into some of those questions. So if you want, we can dive into them now.
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
Please. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's go ahead and get started with some of the questions. Yee-Wei, could you tell us a little bit more about what makes Wonderland stand out as a hyperlocal film?
I think, I mean, whether it's by chance or not, the film actually was the development for the story started
Hmm.
actually just before COVID hit. We announced that we were developing the story and gonna shoot it for the cinema, ironically at ATF 2019 December.
Okay.
And that was right before, I totally could see that the world is going in a totally different, we're going into a whole new world right
Yeah.
after that. And we, and in a way, because of that, the few years of break that actually allowed us to develop and focus more on writing the story a lot more. And
Hmm.
and when we during that time when we pitched for the film, I think we were in a slightly less risky environment where the investor who was involved was open to trying a hyper local film because we could see the trend, or at least within my country in Singapore, where we are
Hmm.
hitting it's doing a lot of co-productions with a lot of other countries, and you could see a lot of stories being starting to take shape in the form of where the director's gonna come from. The story typically tells the story of those directors, and and we were seeing a lot of films that was where we are co-producing with from Singapore, but the stories were very much driven by the local Southeast Asian directors doing their hyper local stories, and
Okay.
um, and I was doing my part in a way, also unknowingly doing a hyper local film. Uh, Although we were thinking, okay, will it be too restricting because we're just doing something local, right?
Okay. So
But
if we took one step back there, what
yeah,
specific elements would you say make it hyper local? Is it just the location setting? Is it the cultural integration into the story? How,
I
what?
it's
Yeah.
the cultural aspects of it.
Okay.
Yeah, the way uh, how that film talks about how family behaves between family members, and in my case, between a very traditional father in Asian father figure who typically do not share their feelings very openly, right? I describe this film as a film where it's a love story between family members where nobody says "I love you," which is
That's
probably not. Yeah, there's no "I love you" at all in the entire film, right? But
there's truth to that though, right? So I
but
think people.
that's how Asians are, right? But however, in a way, could it be like a cultural experiment? We all realize that hey, it doesn't require. I mean, the fact that it's hyper local doesn't hide the fact that certain values
Mhm.
uh, that we as human beings across different countries uh, our
Absolutely.
members, right?
Yeah.
For instance.
Yeah, I would agree with that. If we get into the next question, in your experience, how has the rise of hyperlocal content impacted the way audiences engage in films in Southeast Asia? In other words, have you noticed any shift in viewer preferences or expectations?
Interesting. I think maybe we like yourself as well. You shared a little
Hmm.
bit like you came from the generations where you collect DVDs, Blu-rays, right? And I think there's one particular habit within Southeast Asia that proved to be very useful to us
Hmm.
unknowingly over the years. Like from I think easily from the 70s, where regional countries lapping up with subtitles. We are
Yeah.
very accustomed to watching films with subtitles on. And the film might be in a totally different language, let's say from Hong Kong, from 70s, 80s, 90s. Hong Kong movies were great, but like the Kung Fu movies and people in Southeast Asia, even though we are not from Hong Kong, we are all lining it up, right? But we don't understand Cantonese. We'll read the subtitles, English, Chinese. Today, same thing is happening with Korean hyperlocal dramas and movies. And at one point, it was Japanese where there was a rise of pop during the 80s. Region and the regional, like myself, growing up watching things like the Japanese anime, Ultraman series, I never understood. I always preferred to watch them in the native language, yet with either the Chinese or English subtitles.
Yeah, I would prefer subtitles over dub any day. So that makes sense.
Yeah, and when you're in Malaysia, you're used to seeing 3 lines of subtitles, Bahasa and English and Chinese, which is very unique, right? And this is something that I think unknowingly is prepping us for a world where actually I was speaking to someone who was producing Southeast Asian film, one of the co-producers, who was from XYZ Films, I think, who co-produced The Raid.
Yeah.
They were seeing the trend that actually because of the rise of mobile phones, young people these days are more accustomed to watching shows with volume off and reading subtitles.
On. Yeah, okay.
Or even with headphones and with subtitles when they're traveling, in public transports. So as a result, the younger generation of Americans are open to watching like things. They've grown up getting ready to consume your South Korean content already.
Yeah,
with subtitles on.
It opens the door to so many more stories if you're open and accepting this, looking at the subtitles, right, and listening it to their origin language, because you get the intent, the intonations, and everything else. So it's wonderful. I almost feel like your answer here kind of answers my next question for you, which is how do you balance the appeal of hyperlocal content with broader market trends to ensure your films reach a wider audience? Subtitles, it has to be one of those things, right? As people take on and are willing to look at it, they have more stories that they're open to. Now, do you think that the accessibility of this content has improved overall, and audience are actually seeking, from the Americas, looking for Southeast Asian stories, South Korean stories? There's a lot out there. I'm just wondering, is that the future now? Are people looking outside of Hollywood to find what to watch next?
I think so. I mean, we look at the trends that is going around the world, right? Are people looking outside of Hollywood? I think that's a question to ask, and maybe this is a good time I could share a presentation that I
absolutely
have, prepared, right? And it in a way talks a little bit about the trends. Hang on, give me a second. Wow, it's already preloaded. Awesome. Okay. So I want to share a little bit about some of the stats, which I think is best, as opposed to that actually validates some of the theories that I have about what drives the trend within the region. So we take a little step back. Say just a few years ago, right? What are the big things that have been happening that's affecting media industry, right? Generally, right? 2019 December, just as I was announcing my my fifth film, and we
Yeah.
totally could see
No
COVID
association.
happening, right?
Separate events.
And between 2019 to 2022, I would say end of 2020, and maybe even to May, worldwide, right? We've gone into the great pause, as some call it, and film production has severely been affected. Like there's just especially in Hollywood, right? Everywhere that consumes Hollywood, you're gonna see a severe lack of production, and also not being able to go to cinemas doesn't help. And you see box office results. You look at this. This is the charting Singapore US box office, right? Going up until 2019, bam, goes down, and you see that it is still recovering, right? Up until 2023, and it still hasn't gone back to pre-pandemic numbers yet. But interest and not adding to this, right? In the last year, so it's dropped tremendously, right? I mean, I don't have to read this. You can see the problem. This happened. The WGA and the SAG and the SAG went on strike for almost an entire year. So production was also halted. And from what I can hear from my friends, in 2024, not everything has recovered fully yet on the production side as well. So what does that mean? That means for the past few years, there's going to be a dearth of Hollywood content serving the rest of the world, right? Because Hollywood is the biggest exporter of even though you look at China and India as being huge market on its own, in cinema, Hollywood is still by far number one, right, for exports. So what happened? What would you expect, right, when there's not enough Hollywood content serving the region? But ironically, in the last 2 years, in Southeast Asia, we're seeing a different trend, which is exactly what we were talking about, right?
It's an opportunity in all this, right?
Exactly right. So in Vietnam, bam, it's hitting record, exceeding pre-pandemic. Okay. So that means that Vietnamese really want to watch, still want to watch movies, right?
Yeah.
And the interesting trend is in 2022, more than 50% of the box office belongs to domestic films.
Amazing.
Domestic that Hollywood is providing that opportunity for. So that is, and it's not just happening in Vietnam, right? So these are numbers you see in Vietnam. More than 50% of the box office is domestic. That means people really want to watch their own local films, right? And then same thing, Indonesia, 2020, 56%. And then in 23, it's still at 48%, which is crazy, right? And their numbers are actually, even though the percentage has gone down by a bit, their overall number, the actual revenue actually went up. Attendance actually went up. That means the entire industry is growing on its own, on the whole, not just, and it's gone, you're talking about 50%, more than 50% domestic content.
Yeah, even
and
if Hollywood is just pausing for a little bit, I see this really planting the seed for future growth, right? It's going to increase that consumption, the awareness, just the desire to see more of that hyperlocal content for sure.
Yeah. So in Malaysia, same thing. Okay. And 2022, 34%, 2023, 21%. And actually that 34% is largely driven by this one particular film that broke all records, hit like number one film of all time. In 2023, there's another one. It did not hit as much as 50 million versus 97 ringgit, but still That film is like the second largest box office in Malaysia of all time, which is crazy, right?
Yeah.
Still, you're looking at 20-30%. And of course, Thailand. So during COVID years, it went down to an all-time low of 15 to 20%, right? But bam, 2023 bounced back, and with their staple, their horror films, okay, was driving that. And we all know this year is driven by this other film that nobody saw coming, and it's not a horror film, you know. But still, it's recovered really well. 40% is domestic. So obviously in Southeast Asia, we're picking up the slack. I do want to bring this one, which is probably the odd one out, which is Singapore. We are at 2.83 to 2.9%, which is abysmal compared to our neighbors, right? It's abysmal, yes. But
you're watching all your neighbors' movies. That's
but we've always been and I'm going to show another chart which is fascinating. Okay, so this is the chart of cinema attendance in Singapore. Okay, this just came out like today, and this numbers was provided by the and do you see something familiar?
Yeah,
it looks exactly as the earlier chart that I have shown from Hollywood.
Yeah.
And why? Because we consume more Hollywood films than all of our neighbors. And not just that, I think unlike our neighbors, we are not producing enough hyperlocal content.
Gotcha.
To take advantage of this 2 years lack of Hollywood films. So I think this shows even more clearly that, hey, actually, if we do quality work on top of just being hyperlocal, when you do something of good quality that could match, say, the production value of Hollywood content, which I think is pretty easy now because of how cameras have tremendously dropped in prices relative to the quality that they are getting, right? These days, I mean, you look at something that is sub $10,000 cameras could arguably reach something that you couldn't achieve in previous decade. In terms of cinema quality, right? So that means the cost of doing quality films has dramatically been reduced. And so when you're doing a domestic film with good quality, people will respond.
Sure.
Yeah. And I think this year we don't know what's the end. We haven't reached the end of 2024 yet, but we already know how this one Thai film is just,
it's very surprising.
Yeah, no one saw this coming, right? And why I could attest to that, it was because exactly 1 year before this, I was having a meeting with a few Thai writers who one of them happened to be the director, Pat, of this Grandma Comes Home. Grandma, How to Make Millions Before Grandma Dies. It was exactly 1 year before it was released, and we were like chatting, and he said, "Oh, I'm making a film. It's not a horror film, it's just a film about old woman, dying. And no one saw it coming. It was his first film as well. So, exciting. And for myself, for Wonderland, I think the estimates from the cinemas coming out from the results of how Singapore hasn't really recovered. We did more than 4 times bigger than the cinemas estimates for our box office. So, in a lot of ways, I think we are showing we are exposed that hey, if we quality wise and offer the audience the choice, they would like to watch things that is very hyper local to themselves. And in the case of How to Make Millions Before Grandma, I don't. They make it for their own market. Yeah,
Yep.
look at how it's traveled, because it doesn't matter that it's in Thai and it's subtitled. What matters is the quality of the production and how universal the message in the film is.
Absolutely. I think with
Yeah.
that, I did want to go back and touch on when you were talking about cameras, the opportunities to be able to use new technologies. If we jump to a technology question next for you. So, with your background in both filmmaking and technology, how do you see some of the later innovations now, like HDR and virtual filmmaking, change the landscape for film production?
Yeah. I know people are gonna say I'm because Dolby Atmos and Dolby Vision certified facility. Yeah, biased. Of course, you're gonna say they're the best. But I mean, I don't need to be the one to prove it. Look, the numbers shows Hollywood film that is coming from the studios, as well as the premium content on OTT are either graded and mastered to Dolby Vision for picture and mixed in Dolby Atmos. And given how we in the past one year or two, we have the licensing for Dolby has made it even more accessible for everyone to have ability to do Dolby Atmos and Dolby Vision at close to no additional cost. I mean, we are not charging any of our clients additional to do these content at this kind of quality, because I would consider them already quite mature. The tools are very mature, and I would say given the same amount of time for a 5-day mix, you're absolutely gonna come out at the end of the 5 days a better quality film, mastered the way it sounds and the way it looks, compared to how it was before Dolby Atmos and Dolby Vision existed. You don't, even if you don't spend the extra time, you're gonna get a better output. So yeah, but with great powers come great responsibilities, right? So oftentimes I see, because of the wider gamut of dynamic range and that you can color grade your films to, people tend to say 5 days is not enough, 1 week is not enough, 2 weeks is not enough, right? and they want to spend more time. On top of that, sound as well, because you start to have your sound is going to be in a XYZ box. It's no longer going to be 7 channels, of sound. Suddenly your canvas has opened up. You can do so much more than what you couldn't before, and that in the end actually encourages the film, because I can be more creative. I want more time, but of course but that's it. Even if you, like I said, even if you spend just exactly the same amount of time, given how much budget you have, as before, come out with a better product in the end anyway.
Yeah. So from what you're saying, it sounds like from the audience demand for better quality, you have to be able to incorporate these tools, but you need the time to actually build that into the creative process, really, right? So makes sense.
Yeah. In Southeast Asia, like I'm a huge fan of HDR, right? And it's very hard to describe what HDR is. And often I said, guys, you have to see it for yourself. Once you see it, you will understand. And the first people who gets it are the DOPs, right? And they're like, oh, wait. Now, when people are shooting, we created log profile and shooting in RAW to maximize the dynamic range of what we can deliver. Right? Often when we deliver for SDR, we are not optimizing what we have shot.
Yeah.
But now with HDR, we can see what we shot as much as maybe not 16 stops, but almost more than 12 stops, right? With your OLED TV at home, with your cell phone. One thing don't have any Dolby Cinema.
Okay.
Dolby Cinema. And I think Japan and Korea are the most recent ones to have it. China had it, but within Southeast Asia we have none still. So the thing is, we have been grading works in the past few years to HDR.
Okay.
And many times, like, I couldn't deliver it to the cinemas, and they're like, "Oh, why does it look so good in your facility? What does it look so, Then I say, okay, maybe this is the next big leap for the cinema when technology comes right after 3D, because 3D was the last push for everything going digital, from analog, to digital, and it happened about 12 years ago when this little film with blue people come up appeared and changed the industry, right? I think
it's surprising, right? Like in the last 10, 15 years, from once we've gone digital cinema, how many things have changed in such a short period of time? When you look at cinema as a whole being around for over 100 years, how much hasn't changed? So it is progressing. It is progressing quick in this last decade. And of all of the different advancement, it sounds like you've kind of got your hands full and you're excited most maybe about HDR. Is there anything else that you see on the horizon that kind of intrigues you?
So, like, while right now, worldwide, if you want to have HDR in cinema, and if I'm not wrong, Christie is the one that supplies projectors for it, right?
Yeah.
And I think December, SMT has published the first spec for DCI HDR Cinema.
I've read it many times.
And I'm still amazed by the numbers. I'm like, how are you gonna get this number? But it makes sense because it covers emissive screens as well, right? Not just projector screen. So I'm like, okay, I guess that number, that $299 to tech nerd. 10 cinema, right? But then the new technologies of light steering technology, how you're gonna the dynamic range that's required for HDR in cinemas, how do you allow regular cinemas to upgrade to this new screen? I think it's essential. Because that has been sold in the past few years has a better screen than most regular cinema halls. And I think audience can feel the difference. They might not be able to articulate it, but I think if you look at Hollywood, how the trend is, and how OTT, given the opportunity that it has in the last few years, able to showcase, and then you have your OLED TVs being sold at homes at such ridiculous prices these days. I think it's essential that cinema has to make that leap.
I'd agree. As an entirely movie fanatic, I think part of that experience of going to the cinema has to be better than something that you'd see on your phone or on TV, right? And it's a different discussion for a different time, but I'd say, as part of Christie, there are things in the works that on our side we're excited to be able to share in the near future that help get us you and I will talk separately from this.
And from what I have heard, I'm really excited, because I think the fact that having 70 published a spec like this, I think, okay, great. That means things are going to happen in the next few years, right?
And they are very rigorous specs, right? So you'll be able to almost separate between what is real HDR in the future and what is pseudo HDR. So it'll be exciting times, I think.
Yeah, and I can't wait for that day to come. And I believe is given how quickly things are moving, it's probably going to happen within the next 5 to 10.
Yeah.
I
do have one more question. I think we're getting to a little past the half-hour mark here. If we jump back from technology to the hyperlocal side, how do you see the future of hyperlocal content evolving in Southeast Asian cinemas, and what role do you think technology will play in this evolution? You think HDR will be a factor in that, in the storytelling and cultural aspects of it, or
So I think HDR, like I said, is able to have access to a larger canvas, and to a different kind of canvas, not just a larger canvas, right? And a type of painting tools where they could present their latest works. How do you use dynamic range to make people feel differently as opposed to purely one flat color space with one set, like 5 stops of dynamic range, right? And same thing with sound, where sound is often, I often tell people, say, if you watch, how do you know a horror film is really good? Okay, turn off the sound when you're watching it. And it's no longer scary, okay? Often people watch horror films at cinema and they're like covering their eyes. I say, you're covering the wrong thing. Yeah, because often it's the sound that scares people, not the picture. The picture is
anticipation. Yeah.
Exactly. And that rumbling or that silence, the lack of it. So very much, I think having a larger canvas for us to express ourselves is great, and it allows at the same time, because HDR doesn't require additional costs when it comes to production. Since the first Red One came out, you are able to shoot at more than 10-bit log with more than 12 stops of dynamic range. And if you archive your raw and your log footages, you can restore them to HDR or grade them to HDR. That you have always been. And as long as the DOPs are exposing things right and archiving their things right, they are already doing HDR unknowingly, right? You don't need additional money to produce in HDR, and the cost for doing HDR in post is not negligible right now. Basically, almost everywhere is easy to do post in HDR and Atmos. So I would say this is a good chance for someone for regional filmmakers who always felt like, our quality can't hit Hollywood standards. Now there's no excuse. You can do it at the same cost, especially for films like drama. It's not. In fact, we have the advantage because we have lower cost in production for hiring the crew to production. Everything. We are the ones at the advantage, and there's no excuse for us to say, hey, we can't match Hollywood quality.
That's true.
Films. Even I dare say at one point, VFX is considered the holy grail, right? It's hard to do a high-end VFX film that can match, say, international. But you look at how Godzilla -1
Yeah.
has proved nope. If you have the current tools accessible to a lot of regional filmmakers, you can do something of Hollywood quality at a fraction of the budget if you know what you're doing.
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah, but I want to stress that if you know what you're doing, so work with the right partners, because it's it's easy to mess things up in post. We always tell people that why do you spend so much effort, in production, and you spend years developing a story and only to have it being destroyed in post when you do not do it properly.
You're starting to get into a final question that I had for you. So maybe we do that, but one last housekeeping bit as we're nearing the end of the session, and we're going to ask you that question. For everyone that's in the chat, we're going to start getting into it. So if you do have some additional questions, make sure to put them into the Q&A panel, and we'll try to get to them, as many of them as we can. So that last question I have for you, Yee-Wei, is what advice would you give emerging filmmakers in Southeast Asia that want to explore hyperlocal storytelling, right, and leveraging those technologies? I think, like you said, working with partners is probably number one, with the right partners.
So I think that on the other flip side, for I'm gonna share something more on content and story development, because I think for even up to today, there are many schools of thought that say that we should aim to export our content like Korea. We should aim to export our content like Hong Kong and all Hollywood, right? They say that's the only way to expand the market. And I feel that actually, ironically, that is maybe a little misleading. At history, I like to look at history and look at numbers to say, okay, how do I justify certain schools of thought, right? If you look at examples in history where people are able to export internationally, there's only one that has been able to do so consistently for 100 years, and that's Hollywood. Right? Currently, it's Korea. For 3 decades, it was Hong Kong. Right? I'm not talking about the size of their own domestic market. I'm purely talking about which ones, other than having their own domestic market, can export externally, right? You're talking about Hong Kong, that for 70s, 80s, and 90s, they were exporting not just the Hong Kong movies, they're exporting their own culture. You're talking about Hong Kong TV dramas, you're talking about Canto Pop, you're talking about Hong Kong movies, the Kung Fu movies, Bruce Lee. They created people like Bruce Lee and Jackie Chan, right? But do they look like they are trying to pander to international audience? I would arguably say no. Their jokes are hyperlocal as well, but I think that is the charm. And being hyperlocal is actually an advantage that I think people lack to see. Look at the Korean stuff. We watch them and we fall in love with Korean content. We look at Korean content sometimes, even without the sound being on, we know this is Korean content because of the way they dress, the way they walk, the way they are shot. At one point, Japanese content, Japanese movies as well, right? The Japanese anime, you look at the style, this is Japanese and not European and so forth. So I think, ironically, the way that we can dig into our own culture and find ways to emphasize how special we are can actually be our unique selling proposition. And use that.
Very valuable piece of information.
Use that as our USP, but not to worry that the values that we're gonna put the messaging that is gonna be in the story will not be universal. More often than not, they will be. Most stories come with a message, like about resilience, about family love, about even love, right? Love
Yeah.
between two person. Who's to say a love between two person is not the same between Asia and the West? It's
Yeah.
the same, right?
Yeah. Those recurring themes are going to be there, right? It's how you
Exactly,
go about telling the story, I think, is a
exactly.
big difference.
Yeah, you have a film about an Asian loving a dog. I'm sure someone in the West can relate.
I would hope so. Yeah.
Yeah. So I would say dig in to find what makes us unique and use that
Mhm.
as the unique selling proposition. Because guess what? When I'm a marketing major, right?
Yeah.
One of the key thing when it comes to selling a product is what is your USP?
Yeah.
And I would say what is uniquely your culture is your USP. Dig in.
Yeah.
Because that will be something
Absolutely.
fresh for audiences because audiences like to see something fresh, right?
Guys, that is an excellent piece of advice from Yee-Wei. So I hope everyone that's listening in takes that to heart. So thank you for that, Yee-Wei. I know we're coming a little bit close to the end of this session, so maybe we'll jump into the Q&A portion now, if that's fine. I think some are starting to come through. So the first question that I have here for you is, are movies like Parasite and Crazy Rich Asians considered hyperlocal films in your opinion?
um, I would say Parasite, yes. I'm not so sure about Crazy Rich Asians, because Crazy Rich, I'm following the traditional way of how stories are told. Who is the main character in Crazy Rich Asian? Is an American-born Chinese,
Mm-hmm.
right? And she traveled from US to a exotic country. In this case, it's Singapore, and it's a story of an American looking at Asia, not so much an
Mm.
Asian story traveling to US, if you know what I mean. In the end, it's about the perspective. Which perspective is the story being told from?
Yeah.
I think that will define the hyper localism of it. Often having local writers write for local market, that is a good way to make sure that it's appealing to the local. Trying to reach beyond, meaning if you don't have a defined uh, market for your story, often you end up having there. If you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very sure when Crazy written in a way that says how would this appeal to the American audiences first and not the Asian audiences first.
Yeah.
And it's portraying Asia in an exotic way that will appeal to the Americans, not so much the Asians, if you know what I mean.
That completely makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's a good way how you've defined it there. If we get into question 2, what advice would you give to your younger self when you were just starting out in filmmaking? This is a very introspective question.
A little bit of background. I did not go to film school. I actually went to business school. I'm an accidental filmmaker. So sometimes I do wonder how, looking back, it's almost like a past life how I got into this industry that I did, because I did not go to school for it. If there's an advice I would give myself when I was younger, I would tell myself the same advice that a fortune teller actually gave me, which didn't make sense. And he said that, hey, don't worry if it looks like you don't know what you're doing. Everything will connect. And sometimes in order to go far, you have to go slow. And sometimes just go with the flow, because I half the time I think I was exploring, trying to find out where my strength was. And along that lines, along the journey, there are many times you question yourself a lot. Like, am I on the right path? is this the right way? But sometimes if you don't and maybe the advice, everything will work out.
Yeah, no, that's good advice, and I think that's actually good general life advice, guys. So if you're listening in and you're taking that, it's not just about filmmaking, right? Whether you're in business or anything else, I think that's good advice to have. Question 3 for you: how do you typically approach the development of a new film idea? So do you start with a theme, a character, or a particular scene in mind?
Interesting, but my recent stories that I've been developing has been often sparked by something that I encountered in a news article.
Hmm.
So often I look at, like my most recent film, Wonderland, was actually sparked by something that happened in school when I was in Michigan. And that story stuck with me for almost 20 years before I found a way to, okay, how do I approach telling the story? And often I try to put myself into all the potential characters in the film and see which perspective is the story best told from, and
I see.
then try to see, okay, what is the best way to tell a story? Because a story can be told in multiple ways. The question, interesting way to tell a story. Many times, if you take a step back and you describe a story that you've just watched to someone, it may sound very mundane and ordinary, but often it's how is played out that and tells the execution that really matters, right?
Mm-hmm. Guys, we're almost at the top of the hour. I've got another question here for you, Yee-Wei. What are your thoughts about Paramount and other huge Western producers trying to expand into the international streaming market?
Oh, what are my thoughts? I think if you look at how I use Netflix as a very good example on how they got into Southeast Asia,
Mm-hmm.
and they tried different ways of trying to understand the local market. The usual way, I mean, the most straightforward way for any Hollywood, I would envision, would be coming in to say, hey, we are the best in the world, this is how you should do it, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think people from the studios would
Mm-hmm.
probably realize that, hey, in Korea and every one of us operates slightly different, and how to work with us as opposed to leading and guiding us,
Mm-hmm.
to take advantage of where our strength is, and allowing us to take advantage of where their strength is as well. So sort of like I think Korea is one of the best example of how on Netflix is developing their content,
Mm-hmm.
and Thailand as well.
Yeah.
How the strategy has changed over the years. It'd be good to look at how their strategies have evolved and learn
Yeah.
from them.
Okay. So it sounds like you're not opposed to it as long as there's an element of being humble and acceptance of taking in the local culture, right? When
It
creating
goes both ways. It goes
Yeah.
both ways. For instance, there's a lot of resistance in learning about why production are done in a way
Mm-hmm.
that it is in quality, and often I am a big proponent of that, right? Because too often within Singapore, many people take shortcuts. I mean, we learn one thing and then we do something else altogether different. But when you have access to work with international, you need to make sure that what I'm doing is shortcuts and understand why I did those shortcuts.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe undo some of the habits that
Yeah.
accumulated over the years. That could be the result of why sometimes we look at Asian films. Oh, why do the quality? Oh, we are using the same equipment. I'm saying, oh, actually cause quality to suffer in your workflow.
Mm-hmm.
These are things that I think we have to learn as well from the Western. And in this past few years, I think it's been a big lesson, especially with the OTT coming in and say, hey, we need to do things properly for Dolby Vision and Dolby Atmos. And then, you shoot with your DSLR 10-bit, you think it's good enough, and then you want to do HDR and you try to, be aggressive on it, and things break even at 10-bit. Then you realize, oh, I don't have enough overhead, things like that,
Mm-hmm.
we until we encounter problems, we don't understand them. So we also need to have that humility when it comes to technology. But when it comes to storytelling, you can see that, hey, the Koreans have really adapted the Americans' storytelling and took it to a new level, and
guys, at the end of the day, it's collaboration and cooperation together, right? It's not one or the other. I think that puts us at time, Yee-Wei. So I do appreciate you being here with us. I also appreciate everyone that's able to join us on this webinar as well. It's been an absolute pleasure being able to speak with you. And thank you again for taking time out of your busy day to be with us. As soon as Wonderland becomes available to watch here, it's definitely going to make it on my list. Not just because we're talking. I do know a little bit of Hokkien, some Mandarin, Cantonese, and I do feel stories like yours would resonate with me as well, even if growing across on the other side of the ocean. Right. So
thank you. It's opening Malaysia next in 3 weeks, 2 weeks.